Just a little bit about our presenter today. TaNefer Camara is an Oakland native and has held a strong commitment to advancing maternal health and decreasing disparities for nearly 2 decades. She is both an educator and provider of lactation care, education, and research. She is a co-founder of the B.L.A.C Course, the first foundational and comprehensive lactation course founded by Black women and focuses on the history and lived experiences of Black people. TaNefer Camara served the community through her consulting business, T.L.C Consulting and Maternal Healing, where she hosts the world-renowned Midnight Milk Hub virtual support group. Please join me in welcoming TaNefer. Welcome, TaNefer. We're so excited to have you back and present for us today.
Thank you. I am excited to be here and excited to present this information to everyone. One of my passions outside of birth and breastfeeding is also teaching and educating. So I hope you all will learn something new in this presentation, or at least if the information isn't new to you, hopefully you will be able to see things from a different perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and share. All right, so today we will be discussing oxytocin and other hormones too, and the link between birth, breastfeeding, and maternal mental health. This presentation is brought to you by myself, TaNefer Camara, maternal health strategist, lactation consultant, and infant feeding specialist. So just a rough outline of what we're going to cover in 3 parts: oxytocin and birth as we know it today, hormones and the impact of birth practices, B, birth matters, how birth impacts lactation, breastfeeding initiation, and duration, and C, out of the mind and into the body, maternal mental health, postpartum care, and supporting lactation. And there is a lot packed into these 3 sections. So before we get started, I just want to share a little bit about myself. So this is my position statement. I am an unapologetic African-American Black woman from West Oakland, California. I'm a wife and mother of 4 birthed and breastfed children. I'm the 8th child and only daughter born to my mother, Zuzini Lumukanda. I'm a newly initiated Iyanifa and Oloshun, priestess of Ifa and Oshun in the Yoruba traditional religious practice. I hold a bachelor's degree in psychology and health education with an emphasis on community health and healing, and a master's degree in healthcare administration. I have a certificate in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders from Postpartum Support International. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant, postpartum healer, and maternal health strategist. I have over 18 years experience in public, private, and nonprofit sector work in social services, research, advocacy, counseling, health promotion, and program implementation. I believe in the advancement of Black maternal health led by, for, and with Black women of all backgrounds, including those without formal education or advanced degrees. I believe in traditional, cultural healing modalities and practices in reproductive and maternal care. My lived experience as a mother, professional, and patient within the system validates my work and qualifies me as an authority on the subject. It is my goal to advance maternal health through creative and strategic measures that challenge the status quo and amplify the voices of Black families, tradition, and cultures, and all people in general. Okay. All right, so I have another disclaimer on the use of inclusive language. It is my duty as a professional and birth worker to respect and honor the racial, ethnicity, ability, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, or gender of the people within the community I serve and throughout the world. I will use terminology interchangeably and in no way am excluding anyone who may not feel represented by a particular word to explain anything related to birth, reproduction, parenting, and lactation. I will do my best to make all feel included in this presentation. Okay. And just before I dive into the presentation, I just want to let you all know that I welcome your questions and comments. And I ask you to use the comment section, or I'm not sure if this feature has a question and answer section, but use that to put your comments and questions. And when I find a good place to break, I'll check for questions. And then when we have time, if we have time left over at the end, I can answer additional questions or just respond to comments. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's talk about birth. Now, babies come into the world and we're not exactly sure what triggers labor. We have some ideas about what triggers labor, but researchers believe that a surge of hormones from the fetus is the most important factor. In response to these hormones, the mother's uterus muscles change to allow the cervix to open. The body also prepares for labor by releasing prostaglandins and relaxin. Prostaglandins soften the cervix and start contractions. Relaxin loosens the joints between the pelvis bones and ripens the cervix for delivery. Oxytocin induces contractions of the uterus, helping to push the baby out. Now, this process is critical. And for as long as we've known, it has been unchanged. The way that nature has intended birth, both the birthing person and that baby, they both go through a series of hormonal shifts, of physiological changes that allow for this baby to emerge from the womb. You have oxytocin, endorphins, catecholamines, and prolactin, which are all significant to the labor process. So what is the impact of these hormones in its physiological state during labor, birth, and postpartum? And what happens when the physiologic process of birth is altered? So let's talk a little bit about oxytocin. Oxytocin is my favorite hormone. Oxytocin is also known as the love hormone. It is the hormone that the same hormone that will get you pregnant is the same hormone that will get that baby out, and the same hormone that will help feed that baby. And so, oxytocin is going to reoccur at several points throughout the reproductive process and throughout life in general. Oxytocin is always showing up. It reduces stress by activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which reduces fear, stress, and stress hormones. In labor, oxytocin releases into the maternal bloodstream, causing contractions and surges in late labor, which will benefit pushing. During postpartum, it also has an analgesic effect, meaning that it can help with pain reduction. And it also has a stress relieving effect in mothers or birthing people. And it also does the same for the babies as well. In lactation, oxytocin promotes release of milk and aids in calming, bonding, and pleasure. So I want you to really grasp just how important this oxytocin is. And our body naturally produces it. And our body also creates receptors for it in the places where we need it. So there are receptor sites for oxytocin on the uterus. There are receptor sites for oxytocin in the milk producing glands. And so what oxytocin does during lactation, particularly, is it causes the contraction of those milk glands. Okay. And what we call the milk ejection reflex, oxytocin is the hormone that is responsible for that. So it is the hormone that is responsible for pushing the milk out, just like it is also responsible for pushing the baby out from the uterus. So what happens when synthetic oxytocin, also known as Pitocin, is used? So this synthetic form may cause uterine hyperstimulation with potential fetal hypoxia. This is going to require that during labor, this mother or birthing person now needs to be monitored during the whole time. And most times when people receive Pitocin, if their labor is induced or augmented with Pitocin, those contractions are going to get really strong. And they may be a whole lot stronger than when the body's own oxytocin is working. So stronger contractions and increased pain without central oxytocin analgesia. So the synthetic oxytocin is actually going to, in some way, cancel out the body's certain mechanism for the body's own oxytocin. So that analgesic effect that the naturally produced oxytocin gives has now been turned off. Like that part almost doesn't even get activated because the body is using the synthetic oxytocin. Okay. So overexposure may cause desensitization of oxytocin receptors, contributing to reduced contractibility, prolonged pushing, instrumental births, meaning a birth that needed to be assisted with maybe a vacuum or forceps or something of that nature to help bring the baby out, and also may contribute to the risk of postpartum hemorrhage. Disruption of newborn breastfeeding behaviors, reduce maternal oxytocin release with breastfeeding, and possible reduction in duration. Now, I don't say all this to present a negative light on the synthetic oxytocin, because there are times where it is necessary, it is needed, and it is useful. But anything, even if it has good intention, does not mean that it is without risk, does not mean that this particular solution to whatever problem arises during that labor, it doesn't mean that there's a effect of this later down the line. And so that's what I want to get to today, is to talk about how, when we move from physiological birth to medicated, induced, augmented births, that we're losing some of our protective factors that actually not only help in the moment of labor and birth, but later on down the line. And I'll get to that before we end this presentation. So what happens to oxytocin effects when there's a cesarean birth? So scheduled cesareans, this is pre-labor, so meaning this is someone who did not experience any labor. They were not in labor when they went in for their C-section. And yes, they proceed to having a cesarean birth. So for both the mother and the baby, they miss the complete pre-labor physiological oxytocin preparations. Full oxytocin process is reduced or absent. This impacts breastfeeding initiation, maternal adaptations, and increases risk for postpartum hemorrhage. Cesareans after physiological onset of labor may have fewer adverse oxytocin impacts than pre-labor cesarean birth. Okay. So, in other words, there is some benefit to having gone through labor, even if the birth results in a cesarean section. And I know that's kind of a hard thing to tell to someone who had to have a cesarean section and also experienced the long labor. But there is some benefit. So I think it's okay for us to present it in that light and let people know that even if you went through labor and then had a cesarean, that labor still had some benefits to both you and the baby. It still did some good. So I think if we told that to mothers and birthing people, that they might feel a little bit better if they understood that physiologically there are benefits to labor beyond just, you know, how the baby is born, but that help to set both parent and baby up for success when it comes to lactation, when it comes to breastfeeding, when it comes to bonding, stress and emotional regulation, and many other things. Okay. So I mentioned catecholamines, and so I want to just briefly share something with you. So the surge of catecholamines may significantly contribute to increased morbidities among C-section born newborns. Okay, so the loss of the fetal catecholamines, surge may significantly contribute to increased morbidities among C-section born newborns, especially following pre-labor C-section. When newborn norepinephrine levels are 20 to 50% of those of vaginally born babies, let me go back to the other slide. Consequences for pre-labor cesarean section newborns may include compromised respiratory transition with increased risk of transient tachypnea and a life-threatening condition, persistent pulmonary hypertension, also increase. There's also increased risk of hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, with low levels of metabolic fuels and blood glucose, a lower body temperature compared to a C-section without labor versus a C-section with labor. And this is due to deficits in the catecholamines promoted thermogenesis. Okay. So in other words, what this is saying is that the catecholamines play a huge role in respiration, in the heart rate, in the ability to regulate body temperature as well as glucose. All of these are highly significant, And as someone who formerly worked in the hospital as a lactation consultant, I can assure you that this was something that we saw often, right? And we don't always really think about the cause and effect. We just think of these things as, this is just routine. These are, if you work in labor and delivery, or you work in the NICU, or you work in postpartum, like, you may see these things so often that you just think like this is just a part of of labor and birth. Some babies come out not breathing well. Some babies come out with low blood sugar. you know some have a hard time regulating their temperature. And yes, there are other factors that that also play a role in that, like, for example, mothers and birthing people who have gestational diabetes, or have a history of type 2 or type 1 diabetes in general, may likely have a baby with hypoglycemia, meaning they have low blood sugar at birth. So there are some other factors, and usually these factors are compounding. So it's not all just one thing. It could be multiple things at play. And it could be that the gestational diabetes or even the hypertension is what led to the interventions in the birth, which led to the cesarean. So it's kind of a domino effect, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's talk about beta endorphin, endogenous analgesia. So beta endorphins are they have this analgesic effect on us. And again, this means that this is something that our body is naturally doing. Our body is not out to harm and destroy us. As I've heard, from many professionals, especially on like social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram, like sometimes people describe pregnancy and birth in a way like our body is just out to destroy us, and that, during pregnancy, like the fetus is going to eat us from the inside out. But there are so many good things that are happening, and I don't think we give it enough credit. So let's give a little bit of credit to the beta endorphins. So through pre-labor, they increase in central receptors and increases in beta endorphin, and they increase as beta endorphins as labor progresses. The benefits are altered state of consciousness. Okay, so sometimes during labor, someone might kind of like seem like their mind left their body, and that can be a good thing because that may help someone cope with the pain and stress of labor. There's a reward and a reinforcement for breastfeeding. Newborn support with the stress of postpartum transition. So this is also helping the babies. Yes, birth is stressful for babies. That's why they come out crying. So the beta endorphins are also helping them. So what are the risks? When laboring, women and people don't feel safe or are in stressful environments that don't provide familiarity, calmness, and privacy, beta endorphins increase to supraphysiologic levels and slows labor. So when we don't feel safe in the environment, when when we're met with hostility or negativity or an unsupportive environment, that may cause the beta endorphins to go too high. And that's not a good thing. We don't want that to happen. So labor analgesics may aid in reducing high beta endorphin levels. So, maybe getting that medication to help take the edge off and reduce some of the pain of labor. Maybe getting that epidural has that benefit of reducing those beta endorphins. But this can be beneficial. However, the effect is a possible reduction in the postpartum reward center activation and priming of potential impact or hormone-mediated maternal adaptations and attachment. So in other words, is while pain reducing medications in labor may help us when these beta endorphin levels get too high, it can also slow down labor and disrupt our body's ability to adapt later on or throughout the rest of the process. So everything has its risk and its benefit, right? Okay. So what about prolactin? Prolactin. I read that this was once called the hormone of mothering. And then it was also called the hormone of fatherhood. So we're just going to call it the hormone of lactation and parenting, because as you'll see later, prolactin, which is extremely, extremely important to lactation, it also plays a role for fathers as well. So prolactin supports conception and early pregnancy. It adjusts appetite, fluid balance, and immune function from pregnancy through postpartum. It has a positive influence on maternal behaviors, maternal infant attachment, and milk production. Prolactin promotes infant growth and brain development. Now, prolactin is so important to lactation. Lactation cannot happen without prolactin. In fact, it is the delivery of the placenta that signals for prolactin to then rise. So when the baby is born and the placenta is delivered, the progesterone and estrogen hormones are going to plummet and prolactin is going to rise. Okay. All right. I said I would pause here to see if we have any questions so far. And looks like we don't have any. So I'm going to keep going. Okay. So what does this all mean? And how does that translate into birth outcomes? So I just discussed how the hormones interact on the pregnant and laboring and birthing body. And with the shift that we've seen in our births, let's try and tie it all together. So between 2014 and 2022, we have seen a shift towards shorter gestations of birth. Okay. So that means that people are less likely now to go full term, 40 weeks and beyond. Preterm and early term birth rates rose by 12% and 20%. So we had a 20% increase in preterm birth rates by 2022. I'm sure the pandemic had a lot to do with that. Full and late term births declined by 6% and 28%. So we have less people going to full term and even less people going to late term, which is, I believe, after 42 weeks. Birth at 37 weeks increased by 42%. This is significant. This is huge that we're seeing an increase of birth at 37 weeks. Now, we've learned that 40 weeks is considered full term. And 37 weeks used to be called late preterm. Okay. Between 38 and 39 weeks may be considered early term. At 37 weeks, we see an increase by 42%. Now, from my experience as a lactation consultant and from what I've learned in supporting families, especially high-risk infants in lactation, is that at 37 weeks, while these babies may be a healthy birth rate, they often are at increased risk for breastfeeding and lactation challenges. And they can be sometimes called the great pretenders because everything may seem well, but they do need additional monitoring to ensure that they are feeding well. And there may be other complications when babies are born at 37 weeks. And some babies born at 37 weeks are just fine and really display very little issues. But if you work really intimate with newborns, you will begin to see some of the subtle differences based on gestational age. Okay. I also looked at ICU admission rates. And this is for the mothers of birthing people. So ICU admission rates are higher for Black, for Asian, Indian, and Alaska Native, for Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders. The overall rate of ICU admissions is 1.8 per 1,000. It's 2.7 for American Indian and Alaska Native, 2.6 for Blacks, and 2.5 for Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders. So this is also a risk factor for successful initiation of breastfeeding and a likelihood of a shorter duration of breastfeeding. So let's talk a little bit about breastfeeding rates. Why are breastfeeding rates declining globally? Now, in the US, we've done a lot to promote breastfeeding. We've had initiatives in support of breastfeeding. We have support in organizations like WIC. And so there's been a lot of focus over the years, but still, we still have disparities when it comes to certain communities and ethnic groups. But globally, we're also seeing a decline. So 44% of infants 0 to 6 months are exclusively breastfed. Undernutrition is associated with 2.7 million child deaths annually. And breastfeeding can reduce health costs and improve economic gains for families and nations. So if we know that undernutrition contributes to child death, and we know that breastfeeding can reduce the cost of health and improve the economy, why are we having such a problem with it? Common problems mothers face in breastfeeding, and this is globally, may include impact on the body. So folks are struggling with sore or cracked nipples. Maybe they don't have enough milk, or they believe they don't have enough. Too much breast milk, as crazy as it may seem, oversupply is a problem and can be really, really hard on someone who is experiencing that. Thrush, blocked milk ducts, mastitis, and breast abscesses. Here are some of the reasons why mothers will stop or don't breastfeed: unsupportive work policies, lack of parental leave, baby not latching, concerns about the infant's nutrition and weight, a lack of support by family and partners, lack of accessible places for feeding and pumping, medications, and HIV. Now, given what I just discussed in terms of hormones and birth, what is not listed here as reasons that mothers are not breastfeeding or they stop breastfeeding? What is one reason that they didn't factor in? The birth, how that baby was born. How was that mother's birthing experience? Was it traumatic? Was it difficult? Was it unusually long? Were they supported? Were they alone? Were they in a hospital versus at home, attended by doctors versus midwives? Did they have doulas? What access did they have to education around birth and breastfeeding? What is the norm in their communities? All of these questions must be answered. About a year ago, I went on a trip to Benin, and I had a chance to sit down at the home and birth center of a local midwife in Ouida, Benin, and we had a chance to talk to mothers there. And it was so cute to see this little boy sit on his mother's lap and start nursing. Because when you look at the data and you look at the rates, and then you're there with the people, you see a different story. And it was so important to hear their story, how times are changing, how, in their mother's generation, and even not too far above them, there was a period of postpartum observance, which many still actually practice today, for at least 40 days, if not longer, depending on how the birth went and depending on how that woman heals. Breastfeeding was pretty much the norm, but many of these women shared that they have to work, that they may not breastfeed as long as they would have. But one thing that they talked about was the support that they had amongst family and community. These were very significant. And while just like we may disagree here about how long a baby or a child should be breastfed, they're having the same conversations. And they're often having the same struggles as us. And it was so important to hear their stories and to hear their struggles and to see that in spite of it all, they're still doing it. So which countries have the highest and lowest breastfeeding rates? So I remember a few years ago, these statistics were a little bit different. Today, South Asia leads the world in breastfeeding at 57% of exclusive breastfeeding between the age of 0 and 5 months. Eastern and Southern Africa trail behind at 55%, Eastern Europe and Central Asia at 41%, Latin America and the Caribbean at 37%, West and Central Africa at 37%, Middle East and North Africa at 33%, East Asia and the Pacific at 31%, North America 26%. In 2020, only 26% of babies born in North America were exclusively breastfed between 0 to 5 months. We have to do better. The World Health Organization has had campaigns for as long as I can remember. We've been campaigning for the same things, and we're not done yet. We're at an unprecedented time in history where we have the opportunity to maybe have the first female president of the United States. And we have to let them know, like, these things are still important to us. And I know the work that Vice President Kamala Harris has done when it comes to maternal health. And I'm familiar with the Maternal Momnibus Act, but we have to continue to let our political leaders, our city and state government, ourselves who are on the ground doing the work, we have to continue to push the importance of these, of having paid maternity leave, of having workplace accommodations. Breastfeeding is easier when your workplace provides support and dedicated time and space to breastfeed or express your milk, right? So we could look at the world, but we could also look at what is happening right here at home. California boasts some of the highest breastfeeding rates in the country, and we should be very proud of that. And our county also reflects kind of what is happening on a statewide level. And maybe in some areas, we're doing a little bit better. Okay. If we look at breastfeeding rates by race, and we look at any breastfeeding, that means they just put the baby to the breast. We don't know for how long. That doesn't mean that they only breastfed. They could have given formula, but as long as they breastfed some, they're counted in any breastfeeding. And we have a 93.2% rate for Hispanics, for multi-ethnic, 92.8%, for Black, 87.2%, American Indian, 92.2%, Asian, 94.3%, Pacific Islander, 88.6%, white, 95.6%, other, 89.8%. And then when we come to exclusive breastfeeding, the numbers significantly drop. Is exclusive breastfeeding an unobtainable goal? Are there other factors beyond just choice that lead people to breastfeed all, none, or some? Absolutely. And that's why I started off talking about the hormones in the birth, because I want you to understand that it's so much deeper than just a personal choice. That what happens in birth absolutely matters. That these aren't things that, are just anecdotal. We know that epidurals have an effect on that newborn. We know that it's going to, that it could possibly affect that baby's breathing, that baby's ability to to latch and to coordinate a suckle immediately following birth. We know that the risk of inductions have an impact on breastfeeding, but we never associate what happens to birth, what happens in birth, we never associate it to the breastfeeding rates. Instead, we do something different, and I'm gonna get to that in a moment. All right. So I want to just take a moment. Okay, I don't see any questions or comments, so we're gonna keep going. Okay, I see Aisha Wilson raised her hand. Go ahead.
All right, thanks so much for the information. I have a question in regards to how long or what's too long do you think of breastfeeding?
What's too long? See, that's a personal choice that each parent or family will have to make. Whenever breastfeeding is no longer mutually desired between mother and baby, that's when it's time to stop.
Right.
The World Health Organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommend exclusive breastfeeding for at least the first 6 months of life. And then at 6 months, it is recommended to start solid foods and then to continue with breastfeeding until they're ready to stop. It's recommended for at least up to 2 years. A lot of people are encouraged to at least go 1 year, but it's a personal decision. And as a lactation consultant, when working with families, while I might, inform them of what the health recommendations are, I do make it a point to provide them with the information so that they can make the best decision for them and their child, and let them know that no matter how long they plan to feed their baby for, that they should be supported. So if they tell me, you know what, I only want to do this for a week, I'll give them the information. If they are, set on 1 week, then let's do everything we can to support them with that 1 week, right? Because if you get them through that 1 week, chances are they will continue for another week and maybe another week and another week. Okay.
Right.
So
Thanks for that. Because I have a sister friend, I wanted to give her some information. She has a lot of kids, but she has the position of being able to breastfeed for a while. And then she's always getting pushback with our friends and family because they're like 2 or maybe 2.5. And, they're eating food, but they're also like verbally can say, I want to,
right.
titty.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just want to encourage, like, if
Yeah.
they're comfortable and it's mutual for them both. I mean, I never see a problem, but other folks, how to empower.
Absolutely. And the truth is that globally the age of weaning on average is around 4 years old. And once a child loses their baby teeth, it's probably like, okay, if you losing teeth, it's probably a really good time to stop. But but the benefits of a child receiving human milk beyond the first year are enormous. They continue to reap the benefits of those growth factors, of immune protection. The milk also will change to meet their growing needs. And so there's lots of benefits to continuing beyond a year, but it's a personal decision. And yeah, and nobody can make that for anybody else.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So birth absolutely matters. And understanding birth and breastfeeding as a continuum and not separate events is important for how we go about supporting families. So we will review what I call the 3 S's: safety, support, and surroundings. Safety, an environment of one's choosing, having established and built trust with providers and care team, believing that one's life or that of their child is not in imminent danger. Okay. So while someone is pregnant or in labor, they need to feel safe. What is their environment like? How can we create an environment that feels safe for that person? Who needs to be there in order to create that feeling of safety? How do we establish and build trust with providers and the care team? Okay. How do we ease someone's mind to let them know, like, you and your child, you're in good hands, and we're all here for your health and well-being. You are not in danger. Support. Family, friends, and community that align with your goals. Now, we know that not all family is exactly supportive, but we may have friends or community, chosen family, whose goals align with ours. Access to resources and systems of support. So I want you all to think about what resources are available today that our families can utilize to get the support that they need. Where can they find someone to talk to when they need it most? Surroundings. Is this a positive environment? Does she have access, or do they have access to the things that they need? Is the environment conducive to healing? This is an important one. Is the environment conducive to healing? What does that even mean? What does it look like to have an environment conducive to healing? And is that the same for every person? I can tell you now that it is absolutely not. Okay. I remember years ago, before Highland had the new building, and I saw someone who was pregnant and they were at Highland for something, and they were like, I'm not going to deliver here. I'm going to deliver at Altabates because they have TVs and they have this and they have that. And then someone else would come who's pregnant, and they would say, well, it's not the nicest building or the nicest rooms. And back then, you might have to share a room with someone. But they appreciated the staff, the nurses, the midwives, the doctors, the relationship that they had with the people providing the care. That was more important than whether or not the room, was pretty or it had, a nice TV. Okay. Some people want candles and they want, to put up lights and create a home-like feeling. Some people want to birth at home because that feels the most healing to them. And some people find healing and peace of mind in the hospital, knowing that if anything went wrong, there is fast access to life-changing or to life-saving tools, medications, and doctors. So what everybody views as conducive to healing may not be the same, but it is important that each and every person have the choice and the option to have the surroundings that make them feel the most comfortable. Right? Okay, so let's talk about past trauma and birth trauma. Past trauma often comes up in pregnancy and birth. For people who've experienced trauma in their life prior to becoming pregnant, they may have a need to have autonomy, meaning they need a level of independence. They may want to know everything that's going to happen before it happens, because that might help them feel like they have a sense of control. They may have fear. They may have triggers, right? Feelings of inadequacy. And there's also a sense of reclaiming power. There may be some aspect of their pregnancy and birth and postpartum period where they want to reclaim power that was once taken from them. They have a need to have agency over what is happening to them in their body. For some people who've had past trauma, that may also mean that they have issues around trust. That may also mean that they have issues around touch. Consent is important in this. For some, breastfeeding or body feeding is a way of reclaiming power, is a way of bonding and connection. And for others, it brings back painful memories. And it's very difficult for them to do. And sometimes they don't do it at all. Now, what happens with birth trauma? And I want you to think about the hormonal impact. What naturally happens with our hormones and what happens when labor and birth is induced or augmented in some way. Birth trauma makes it physically more difficult. People will have feelings of failure, stress. I did a watch party for the birth justice documentary that came out about a year or two ago. And we watched it as a group in Midnight Milk Club one Friday night. And many of the mothers began to express their guilt that they survived and that they didn't have a chance or a place to share their stories about the trauma of their birth because everyone told them, you should just be happy you have a healthy baby. I see this come up often when breastfeeding and lactation is not going well. And mothers and birthing people are told, well, everybody can't breastfeed. You should be happy. Your baby can just have formula. And so their stories, their trauma, their shame, their guilt is silenced and internalized. When people experience birth trauma, they develop a distrust of the medical system. They shut down. Or they go against it. They rebuke it. Even to their own detriment. We have to take this serious. We have to find ways to prevent birth trauma. We have to find ways to support people who've experienced it and help them to overcome it. Because we are resilient, extremely resilient. And troubles don't last always. There may be challenges, but there's always a way to move forward. So what happens when breastfeeding is a struggle? What happens when it does not go as planned? So I'll tell you what happens. When feeding your baby with your own body, if that was your choice and what you had planned to do does not go well, or you find it to be difficult, you blame yourself. You internalize it as a personal failure. Or you determine that maybe your baby doesn't like your milk, or your baby just doesn't like you. And people sit with those feelings because no one told them that the things that may have happened during their labor and their birth may be the cause. I believe people would have a different perspective if they understood that it's not their fault. People would have a different perspective if they understood what they need to do before, or if they had some idea, and this is where prenatal education comes in, if they had an idea of what to expect. So when it does not go as planned, it hurts. It may cause depression. It may cause anxiety, a feeling of hopelessness. For some people, they try and they say, you know what? I'm done trying. And they may have a feeling of relief in being able to say, you know what? I'm going to bottle feed my baby and I'm going to be okay with that. Some parents choose to use formula. Some choose to get donor milk. And they make peace with that and they're okay with that. Some people get help and support while others don't. What I can say is a lot of people plan for it to fail. I hear more people planning for it to fail so they don't have to deal with the disappointment than I hear people planning for it to succeed. So what does it look like if someone plans for it to succeed. It looks like if you have trouble knowing where to get support, it looks like making up in your mind that this is something that is important and that you're going to give it your best to try and do it. It looks like having had time to be around other people who are doing it and seeing how it goes for them, immersing yourself. It looks like committing to some is better than none, right? But at the end of the day, it looks like support. Okay. So what happened when it does not go as planned? Really depends on what that person's motivation was to begin with, and then what type of support they have access to. Okay. All right. So let's talk about breastfeeding and perinatal mood disorders. But before we go there, let's just take a 5-minute break. Is that okay? Okay. Well, let's go. So we're going to talk about breastfeeding and perinatal mood disorders. First, let's just talk about what are some of the symptoms. If you know any symptoms of perinatal mood disorders, feel free to put it in the chat. What is a symptom? And maybe before that, I should probably ask what is included when I say perinatal mood disorders, perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. What might that include? So it might look like no bonding or inability to bond. Perinatal mood and anxiety disorders may include depression, anxiety, panic disorder, yes. Depressed mood, irritation, yes. Obsessive compulsive disorder, yes. Loss of sleep, loss of appetite, absolutely. Intrusive thoughts, yes, definitely. Postpartum PTSD, bipolar disorders, as well as postpartum psychosis. And there is a sheet in the folder on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, PMADS. And a lot of times I'll hear parents say, oh, I had postpartum real bad. Yes, worrying excessively about your baby. Yes. So that might be those intrusive thoughts. Some people may have obsessive compulsive disorder. So yes, absolutely. Irrational fears of things. I've heard new moms say like, they would have these like fears of walking down the stairs because they think they're going to drop the baby, or fears around even just driving in the car and like, what if this happens and what if that happens? And so all of that may be included in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, right? So the symptoms may also look like feelings of anger, rage, or irritability, scary or unwanted thoughts, lack of interest in the baby or difficulty bonding. So someone earlier said no bonding, loss of interest, joy, or pleasure in things they used to enjoy, disturbances of sleep and appetite. I also saw that one of you said that. Crying and sadness, constant worry or racing thoughts. Physical symptoms like dizziness, hot flashes, and nausea. possible thoughts of harming the baby or yourself, right? So who is at risk? So if you had a history of depression or anxiety or OCD, you're at risk. Thyroid imbalance, diabetes, endocrine disorders, at risk. Lack of support from family and friends, at risk. Pregnancy or delivery complications, infertility, miscarriage, or infant loss, risk factor. Premenstrual syndrome, PMS, risk factor. Financial stress or poverty. Abrupt discontinuation of breastfeeding. Probably didn't think that would be there. History of abuse, unwanted or unplanned pregnancy. These are all risk factors. So what does the research say? Well, research says that breastfeeding has been shown to reduce maternal stress and protect maternal mood. Inflammation is a risk factor for depression. Okay, and this comes from a study from Catherine Kendall Tackett. The study is a new paradigm for depression in new mothers, the central role of inflammation and how breastfeeding and anti-inflammatory treatments protect maternal mental health. Okay. Women with anxiety and depression during pregnancy were more likely to stop breastfeeding before 6 months. Okay. Stopping breastfeeding is associated with an increase in levels of anxiety and depression. Who would have thought that? Because as soon as someone starts to feel anxious or has depression or they're sick or anything goes wrong, people, including many doctors, are going to say you should stop breastfeeding. Ask me how I know. I know because I went into urgent care when my baby was probably about 4 or 5 months. I had some elevated blood pressures, was having some dizziness and headaches. And so I'm like, let me go see the doctor because this doesn't feel right. And this was not my regular doctor. This was the urgent care doctor that was on call at the time. And she told me that I should just stop breastfeeding my baby and get more sleep. And that was the cause of my problems. Completely dismissing my concerns about my blood pressure, in which she told me that people have higher blood pressures and they walk around and they don't know until something happens and they end up in the emergency room. And I told her, I'm trying to prevent that. That's why I'm here today. Yet her solution to my problems was to stop breastfeeding. Challenges or discordance between breastfeeding expectations and actual experience was associated with negative mental health outcomes. So when it doesn't go well or it doesn't meet your expectation, then it will surely affect your mental health. Okay? So because of the surges of oxytocin and the prolactin levels during lactation, it has some positive mood-inducing benefits. So when breastfeeding is stopped abruptly, you may run the risk of increasing levels of anxiety and depression. Okay? But when breastfeeding does not meet the expectations that one had, this can cause significant stress, anxiety, and depression. Okay? So the significant impact of lower oxytocin levels may have on maternal mood and anxiety. Conversely, dysregulation in the maternal oxytocin system may affect the new mother's mood. Researchers measured women's oxytocin and other hormone levels and mood from late pregnancy through to 8 weeks postpartum and found that at 8 weeks, women with lower oxytocin levels during lactation had poorer mood scores, including more anxiety and depression. The cause for dysregulation was not clear, and detailed birth variables were not included in this analysis. This is from Sarah J. Buckley in 2015, Hormonal Physiology of Childbearing, Evidence and Implication for Women's Babies in Maternity Care. Okay. So oxytocin levels are critical to maternal mood and anxiety. Okay. Are you starting to see the connection? Let's talk about Black mothers and perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. 29% to 44% of Black mothers experience perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. One study found that Black mothers had lower levels of postpartum depressive symptoms and high levels of functioning. Okay. So it's that strong Black woman syndrome happening where we don't look like what we've been through. That's what's happening there. Black women with a high school education or less had higher levels of maternal functioning than those who had post-secondary education. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind about Black mothers and perinatal mood and anxiety disorders are that they may be less likely to be diagnosed and treated. A lot of people may say like that they have anxiety or that, they're depressed, or someone else says, oh, that person is depressed, but that's not a diagnosis. Perinatal mood and anxiety disorders oftentimes go undiagnosed, and the true numbers may not be well documented.
Is mommy okay? A lot of people want to tell me that my career is over, that I can't be a successful young woman and a successful young mother. You hear all these things about what you should do with your life, but what do I want for myself when I'm not thinking about what the world expects from me? I didn't want the Hollywood craze to distract from my real life goals. And one of those goals has always been motherhood. But even I didn't know how hard it could be. I wish people took postpartum and what moms go through more seriously. Most days are good, but on those days when I'm down, I am really down. I can't even be apart from my baby for more than 30 minutes without sobbing. The separation anxiety is so real. As a mother, choosing yourself can make you feel even more guilty because we aren't used to it. Society tells us we can't. When I strive for my goals and dreams, that helps my son too. So every day I just wake up and remind myself, you can, you can, you can.
I love Halle Bailey and her sister Chloe, and I really appreciated how she kept her pregnancy pretty private, although there was lots of speculations about it. And while celebrities and wealthy people may have access to care, to support, they could afford to have nannies and staff and different people to help them with their babies, they are still not exempt from the physiological changes that happen with pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And so if her endorsement, if her ability to use her celebrity status reach someone, then I'm all for it. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that. Okay. All right, so let's look at another video. We won't watch the whole thing for the sake of time. But this is from a colleague. She's also an IBCLC, and I believe a therapist, and she's based in the Philadelphia area. So I want to share a little bit of her story.
How are you adjusting to parenthood? What does it feel like to be a new mom for you? What do you like about your new baby? You know, because there are days where you don't like the new baby. Have you been having any intrusive thoughts? Any scary thoughts? I think if I was asked those questions specifically, that maybe I would have opened up. Maybe I would have possibly been able to really either get support that I needed and just have a space to really talk about what I was experiencing. I think there's this notion that women are supposed to be happy and excited, and mothering and parenting is supposed to be this innate thing. But as a new young mom, I didn't have that experience, and I cried literally almost every single day. I had a lot of intrusive thoughts that I really didn't recognize at the time were intrusive thoughts. I thought I was just being a really good parent. Like, I would wind the windows up and make sure I did not put the windows down, because if I did, my baby will fly through the window. I did a lot of sanitizing because I didn't want him to get sick. There's a feeling of isolation, but also self-imposed isolation, because you don't really know that other people are having these experiences. I'm also second generation American, so I am of Caribbean descent. And so even the language and the term postpartum depression isn't a term that is spoken of. And no one was really asking the question about, like, how are you? How are you adjusting to this? My OB provider wasn't asking the question. His pediatricians never asked the question. I wasn't checked in on. So I was unassessed, undiagnosed, and untreated. Was in this 2-day conference learning about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And like, it was very emotional, because it was like, oh my goodness, they're laying out these symptoms. And I'm like, that was me. That's me. And it was a big deal. And I still ask myself the question, like, how did you make it through? But I truly believe, like, this was this innate resiliency that a lot of new birthing people and mothers experience, because I'm not the only one that was not assessed and diagnosed or treated for perinatal mood disorder, and we make it through. And then unfortunately, we have those who do not. I know what the risks are now for untreated mood disorders. Work does focus on Black birthing people, because as a Black woman, I know firsthand what that experience has been like. And a large part of that is really knowing and understanding that there is a health disparity. Black women are dying 3 to 4 times the rate of white women. More recently, in the maternal mortality review for Philadelphia specifically, about 50% of those women who died in the first year postpartum had a mental health diagnosis. It's important for me that women are being heard, being seen, being listened to, and being offered adequate and equitable care. What I really love about what I do is just being able to hold space for new birthing people in a way that I know they would not have had or the opportunity to, and also knowing that there are not many people out there that's holding space for them in this way. But what I really love is to see people go from, this place of hopelessness and despair to this place of feeling as though, I've moved this transition. you know, I'm showing up as myself and I'm able to sit with these emotions and feelings. It's really amazing to see how folks transition and then also be able to help and support other birthing people and moms.
All right. What came up for you listening to Jabina's story? What came up for you so far throughout this whole presentation? Okay. All right. What about fathers and partners? You know, the other parent is also just as much a part of this new baby's life. And they too go through changes hormonally, mentally, physically, spiritually, in all the ways. And so we must also consider that impact because we need the family unit to work together. Let's see what you all said in the chat. Okay, you're welcome. Aisha has to go. Yes, Jerica said the care for Black women and their health is often dismissed. Yes. So dysregulation of any hormonal concentrations and/or amount of receptors in key areas of the brain may serve as a biological risk factor for mental health. This is a quote from Dr. Daniel Singley. So for fathers, they're also having hormonal shifts. Their brains and bodies are changing in preparation and in anticipation of this child that will come into their lives. So what happens in paternal perinatal hormonal shifts? Well, there's a decrease in testosterone. You heard it? Yep, that is right. A decrease in testosterone. An increase in estrogen. Who would have thought? An increase in vasopressin. And also an increase in prolactin and oxytocin. Now, this doesn't mean that, you know, men are going to start lactating, although if they try hard enough, they probably could, some, depending on how much glandular tissue they may have. But it's really interesting to know that they too have an increase in prolactin. I knew about the oxytocin. I didn't know until recently about the increase in prolactin in men. Decrease in testosterone. So for, you know, for some men, that may mean that, doesn't mean that they're less of a man. It means that, you know, there's just a shift in terms of, you know, how they see themselves as providers and what that looks like. You know, people say when fathers have daughters, they get soft. I don't know if there's a difference between testosterone levels between having, you know, a daughter versus a son. I should look that up. I think I will for the next time I give this presentation. I'll look that up. But I wonder if there's anything to that, right? And these changes may increase the more this father or the other parent cares and interacts with that child. So with more responsibility, with more interaction, with more skin to skin time, like these things increase. And it's a good thing because it helps with, their ability to, to bond with their baby, or, with their new child. It helps with their ability to bond with their partner as well. And it makes them more receptive to responding to like the baby's cries and the baby's needs to be met. Okay. All right. So we're going to do a case study now. And we're going to do the breakout groups. So I want you to read the case study. You may want to just take a screenshot because I'm not sure when we go to our breakout groups if you'll still be able to see it. So I'll just read it first. Stacy is a 34-year-old mother, married mother of 2. She has a 4-year-old daughter, and is 32 weeks pregnant with her second child. She had a C-section with her first child after being induced and was told she failed to progress. She breastfed her first child for 9 months, though it was a struggle in the beginning and she occasionally used formula. She has reluctantly agreed to a scheduled C-section this time at 38 weeks. She really wants to breastfeed longer this time, but is worried. She has a history of anxiety and depression from childhood trauma. Her husband is supportive, but works long hours and is rarely able to accompany her at doctor visits, which always increases her stress and anxiety levels. What advice would you give this mom? What services would you recommend? What problems would you anticipate based on what we've discussed so far? And how can we also include the father? So, let me go back. I want you all to discuss this case study in the breakout groups. And we should just take about 5 minutes. Okay. Really quick, I know we're almost at time, but does anyone want to just share one thing that your group discussed? Hold on. Anybody want to share on what advice would you give this mom? And you can unmute. No, everybody's shy.
We talked about advocacy for maybe talking to her doctor about trying to have a vaginal birth instead of a C-section if she didn't want to have one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people may not realize that they could be a candidate for a VBAC. I also work with a research team who's doing some studies on cesarean and VBAC births. And there was this like VBAC calculator that would calculate whether someone was eligible. And for a long time, it was really racially biased because if you were Black or Hispanic, you would get a lower score on, based on race, when it came to whether or not you're a candidate for a VBAC. So talking to the doctor about options around the birth would be really, really helpful and important. Okay. How would you include the father? Anybody have any ideas about how to include the father? Go ahead.
All right. So a couple of things. I think the first thing is I will refer him to an agency that work with dads to kind of give him some moral support. I think another thing I would do is really encourage him to attend because one, it's really an advocating piece for the father to be at the hospital during the prenatal visits. Maybe he can bring up some concerns that mom is having that, in between visits. Another thing is, that's a bonding period, right? When you hear your baby heartbeat and things like that, that's a way to connect and a bond. Another thing is, if he can't be there, making sure that he takes some time and mom FaceTime him in,
Yes.
that he can still get connected, and then possibly ask any questions that he may possibly have as well. Yeah, so those are just some of the things we talked about.
Awesome. That is wonderful. Perfect. Yes, all of those things will help. Sometimes we have to get creative. And, I remember I was pregnant with my last son in 2020 during the pandemic, and having to, go to those appointments by myself. Um, and it wasn't, well, I did have the opportunity to have some of my visits at home because I was planning a home birth and working with midwives. Um, and so that was when, like, my husband and even my other children got to be a part of it. But for a lot of families that I was working with during that time, having to go to appointments or even having to go to the hospital alone was really, really scary. And yeah, so any way that we can either FaceTime them in, um, or share information, or, even having appointments, weekends or evenings, and having access to a fatherhood group. I think, it's very common, like, for uh women and, birthing people to be a part of support groups, but a lot of men, like, really, like, they don't go to support groups. They don't have support groups. And so if there are any that exist, even if it's virtual, we should definitely plug them in wherever we can, if they're willing. Okay, so we only have a few minutes, so we're gonna breeze through this. This section I entitled "Out of the Mind into the Body." So what happens during the process of birth and breastfeeding? You have people go through, they're dealing with, issues around self-efficacy. So they're thinking about, their own behavior and performance, social persuasion. So what other people think, about what they're doing and how they're doing it, physiological feedback, what their body is telling them, what they're feeling, vicarious experience, maybe, someone else's experience. A lot of times people, whether they recognize it or not, may be, influenced by what other people have experienced, what other people have told them. And that could be, bad or good, negative or positive. And then they're forming their own experience. And so we want to give them room to be able to do that. Postpartum support is how we overcome all of those early challenges, all of those issues that come with the hormonal dysregulation. It is through postpartum support. The more support and, like, structured support that someone has, breastfeeding will be easier. Their recovery will be better. Their healing will improve. And so it really takes a village of having that skilled support. So whether it be doulas, midwives, grandmothers, aunties, wise women in a village, fathers, grandfathers, we need a village of people. If they have multiple children, sometimes folks need help with that other child, so maybe instead of another pack of onesies, maybe offer, like, hey, I'll come pick up the 5-year-old and take them to the park from time to time. So, so that you don't have to deal with them and a newborn baby. For some people, it's having meals regularly. It's having their laundry done. All the things that they don't need to think about will allow them to be able to settle into postpartum and bond with their baby. A lot of the issues that I see with my clients has to do with the many things that they are trying to deal with and handle, in addition to to caring for a newborn and trying to heal after giving birth. Family is everything, okay? And sometimes, family is hard. Family can be difficult, but having family support can make things a lot better from a cultural standpoint, being able to eat the foods, from your family and from your culture. That was one of the things I loved about working at Highland, was all the different types of food that, the different cultures of people would bring postpartum. And I would always talk to them about, oh, what kind of soup is that? What are you drinking? Like, oh, what does that do? Because it helped me to understand just how connected we are, and so many, commonalities in, things that different people around the world do for, for mothers and birthing people, to aid in, in their healing, to support their lactation and everything. So family is really critical. And one other thing to say about family is family can make or break a situation. If the family does not support breastfeeding, that can be really, really difficult, and is one of the top reasons why people quit or don't do it at all. Screening for therapy can save lives. I was going to go over this sheet, the perinatal mental health discussion toolkit. You do have a copy of it. This may be useful. It says that as many as 1 in 7 moms and 1 in 10 dads experience symptoms of depression and anxiety during the postpartum period. People of every age, income level, race, and culture can develop perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. So this sheet is in your folder, and I know I'm over time. And just really quickly, creating community. So I created a group called the Midnight Milk Club. This is some of the moms who would meet virtually on Friday nights. In December, we held a dinner and celebration. Many of these people didn't even know each other before, and people came from all over and would join on Friday nights at 9 p.m. And it's late at night intentionally to create a safe space and a safe haven for mothers to be supported, to commune with each other in a time where they may not have access to any other help. All right. So to conclude, physiological birth prepares us for ultimate success postpartum. Hormones play a critical role, and the disruption of the natural hormones may put us at risk for PMADs. Lactation and mental health deserves more study, research, and attention. Race, education, and social economic factors play a role in diagnosis and access to mental health service. Fathers, partners, experience a mental shift as more attention to the role and experiences of fathers and partners is needed to help them cope as well. Birth workers, inclusive of midwives, doulas, and lactation consultants, can and do improve birth and breastfeeding outcomes. Adequate postpartum support, mental health screening, and treatment of PMADs will support the health and well-being of the entire family. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and found it insightful. And thank you to First 5 Alameda County for having me today.
Thank you, TaNefer. We really appreciate this very informative presentation, and it's great to have you back. I want to thank everyone that participated in this meeting as well. We hope to see you in the near future. Again, we appreciate your guys' feedback, and evaluation will be sent. You guys have a nice day. Take care. See you next time.